listening to you talk, all these ideas resonate, they make sense, and I think with so many of the things when we hear about leadership, right, it's oh yeah, I get that. And we sit in a room and we sit in a vacuum and we're like, yep, got it, that makes sense, we nod our heads, but then we go back to our businesses, and like you said, the pressures and all the things that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis sort of seem to take over, and some of these things sort of get on the back burner.
Yep.
And I think especially in a culture where there's not a speak-up culture, it's sort of like a chicken and egg thing, right? Where it's, well, I want to start, but the culture isn't going to support me if I do, so where do I begin? And so I think the question I'd like to start with, and then I'd love to hear the questions that you all have, where do you start? If I know that I'm in a place where I want to promote this in my organization, what's a first step that is going to be something that isn't going to overwhelm everybody or scare anybody, or like, where do I start?
So I think the first thing that comes to mind here is, as a species, we're a packed animal. We're not designed to go alone. And so this is where you go to a friend and you go, am I crazy? You know, I'm feeling this. What do you think? You know, and either they share a perspective with you where your perspective grows and you're like, oh, I am crazy, cool, I'll change my perspective, or no, you are onto something. And I think we need to find friends, leadership buddies, accountability buddies, so that we can go alone, or so that we don't go alone, we go together. And then I think the other thing is, particularly when you look at the type of person that tends to become a CEO or founder, is they tend to be high controlling, high direction, a type of personality where it's very hard to point out that they might be wrong. And so how do you position things in a sense that it's their idea? Hey, I know we had that all hands meeting last week, but I'm hearing a couple bits of feedback from here and there, and instead of having fragmented conversations, what do you think about doing a facilitated listening session? And we can take all the senior lead, like, what do you think of that? You know, as opposed to wasting time and having all these bit conversations. And so you kind of have to look at doing some Jedi mind tricks and making your idea their idea, and seeing that how your idea is actually of service to them and to the organization.
That's great.
Thanks. Yeah.
Raise your hands. Who's got a question for Shed? What are you wondering about? What are you thinking about? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. Can you stand up, please, so that we can hear it and they can understand it, and they're going to repeat the question and just make sure.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just listen to Joe, so.
Yeah, same here. Question for you. I noticed on your slide about the seminary study, that was from 1963.
Yeah.
And our culture has changed a lot since then in this country, and I'm curious if you think those ratios would be higher or lower nowadays, and why.
So the question is, from the Good Samaritan study that you shared, 1963 is a long time ago. How do you feel that our society might be today with those percentages?
I mean, it's a great question. I don't think I'm going to put new numbers. I mean, we could run the study again. I think, though, that we live in a society where we're more quickly to do this than notice the people around us. And I think as a society, you know, we need speak-up culture from the perspective that the human in me can see the human in you. And regardless of our differences, if the human in me can see the human in you, we can make progress. And so I would like to say that the numbers would be higher. I don't think they would be. But I think that what will make the numbers higher is good leadership who both state what we believe and then live that message, is what I'd say. Helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Who's next? Yeah, please, go ahead.
I'm curious, for companies that want to build a culture, what are the most important systems to put in place to build?
To build culture, or to build like a speak-up culture?
I'm going to repeat the question.
For that alignment around like mission, vision, values.
So let me see if I'm getting this question right. What's the best way for us as leaders to build these types of cultures where there are speak-up cultures and we have cultures of mission, vision, and values? Yes?
What are the systems that you put in place, right?
Yeah, the system specifically.
Okay.
I'd love to hear your ideas on this as well. I mean, the thing is, if you put a good person in a bad system, the system wins every time. So systems and culture and environments really matter. If you put a cucumber in pickle brine, I guarantee you 10 times out of 10 that thing's going to turn into a pickle. And so environment and systems matter. So one of the things that I like to talk about and joke about is a number of sales teams that I've heard say, we really value collaboration, and we pay all of our salespeople 100% commission. Pardon? Like, how can you both value collaboration, and when the going gets tough, they all look out for number one? That's a system that doesn't match. And so to create shifts in culture, I think there's 3 gears: mindset, actions, and systems. So mindset is a way of thinking. If we can change our mind, we can change our reality. Garrett's going to speak to that wonderfully this afternoon. We must act in ways to bring those mindsets to life. These are our values in action. You can actually act your way to new thinking, which is really fun. David Marquet, who's a retired U.S. Navy submarine captain, actually manufactured a mindset and feeling of pride that any time a guest would come on board his submarine, he taught his people to look the guest in the eye, say their name, say what they do on board, and say, "Welcome aboard the Santa Fe." And at the end, all the guests and the evaluators would say, "Wow, people are really proud to be part of this ship." They weren't proud, they just acted into a feeling of pride. So they actually backed into it, which is kind of interesting. And then systems. So I think your most important meeting of the week should be with your direct reports, and you probably shouldn't have more than about 5 to 7 of them. That's a system. I think we can create technology that surveys our people not just once every 6 months, but we can actually, there's sophisticated, wonderful tools that give us a pulse of what's going on and where the work needs to happen. So I think systems can be in both design of meetings and also the systems and technology that we use as well. But it's those 3 gears that all need to move: mindset, actions, and systems. Do you have anything to add on that?
I would say just on the system side, I mean, something as simple as hiring, and not simple, but something as rudimentary as hiring and onboarding. It's like making sure that we get people in and they understand right from the get-go what type of culture we're trying to build.
Yeah.
So in that type of a system, and then with job descriptions, or when you're doing 360s or reviews or that kind of thing, how are we incorporating the values of a speak up culture? That's part of our job. That's part of how we do this thing, and just making sure that those get incorporated. Because we hear again ideas like this, we think, oh, this is great. We'll just start doing that. We'll just start talking about it. Talking about it doesn't do anything. You have to make sure that it's written down, that people really understand that it's a responsibility that they have as a leader or whatever role they have, to incorporate these into their job description.
I'll add 2 more points here, which is something that I know you and I both talk about, which is culture dissonance versus culture resonance, as well as 2 leadership truths. So as leaders, there are 2 truths. 1, a whisper is a shout. So the more senior you are, the louder and more weighty your behavior is. And it's worse if you don't do what you say. Second is, the more senior you get, the further away you get from the truth. Because when you walk in, you have the power and everyone tells you what they think that you want to hear. And so leaders have to work extra hard to actually create the type of culture that they speak of. And I think great leaders say, okay, this is our mission, this is our values, this is our purpose, this is our vision. Now we need to create the type of culture that if we're creating an experience where anything is dissonant from that message, we need to hear about it so that we can work on it and actually do something about it. Because if we aren't hearing that truth, we're kind of hopeless.
Yeah, please go ahead.
With COVID and remote work, it feels like the Great Resignation. There's a lack of mission. How do you get back to collaboration, water cooler talk? Encourage people to speak up when everyone's off video on Zoom?
Yep.
Any sort of strategy or tactics for instilling mission or increasing collaboration?
Yeah, so it's still very, so the question is, how do we bring these concepts of healthy, great cultures, people speaking up, having mission, having values, having vision, when everything we're doing is over Zoom, Slack, and the other. And so we still need to remember that there are human beings behind those screens and that we still can create culture. The thing that we're missing is serendipity. So we know that relationship doesn't happen in the meeting. Relationship happens in the pauses, right? So this talk ends and we go to the pastry table and you and I both reach for a cranberry muffin. And I'm like, cranberry muffin? You're like, yeah, I love them. I'm like, me too. Like the antioxidants, it's next level, right? boom, we are cranberry muffin buddies, right? And we will never forget the bond that we have over cranberry muffins. What we're missing in remote cultures and hybrid cultures is when we don't have cranberry muffin moments. And so we actually have to do something where we have to manufacture serendipity, which is an oxymoron. But it's possible, and we have to work at it. Which means, hey, the meeting starts at 10, but everyone hop on if you're free at 9:45. We're just gonna go around the room and you know, Sally's training her dog Lucy, and you know, Nancy's son had a soccer tournament. We're just gonna hang out for a few minutes before the meeting starts. And we're gonna utilize chat and polls and breakout rooms. And so I think we have to have the technology work for us and not the other way around. And I think it's fine to create environments where people can turn off their video if that's what's best for them, but also just hop in the chat. I got a headache, I just had a Amazon delivery, whatever it might be, or you know, like communicate. But also when you ask people to turn video on, share why and give context. So it's still very possible to build culture in this remote environment. And the office is not dead, like getting together in person is not dead, it just needs to be strategic. What's the reason we're coming together? Is it building relationship? Is it brainstorming? Is it solving this really pressing issue? And yeah, I mean, the Great Resignation and the Great Talent Shuffle, I think, is a public outcry of toxic company culture, and people are voting with their feet or their cloud, because we know that people are willing to sacrifice pay for greater flexibility and a better, healthier culture, which means it becomes a competitive advantage for all of you to create flexible workplaces that make sense, where the function of the work dictates where the work is done, and that we have organizations where you have leaders who are leaders and not drivers, right? Drivers may have authority, but they view people as cogs in a machine. You know, when your brake pads run out in your car, do you mourn your brake pads? No, you buy new brake pads, right? That's a driver. Leaders know that their organizations and their teams are living, breathing organisms because they're made up of human beings.
Thanks. Yes, go ahead.
The Boeing example obviously is kind of culture gone wrong to the extreme.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you have tangible examples of leaders nipping poor culture at the bud before it even gets to the level of someone needing to bring that up to you as a leader, or something as horrific as the
Yeah, great question. So the question is, so the Boeing example is sort of an extreme catastrophic example. Do I have examples, positive or negative, where it's smaller scale, or perhaps when you nipped it in the butt and didn't have to go to such an extreme level? So two things come to mind. And I'm just gonna say them out loud so I remember them. One, a personal experience in hiring someone, and second is Barry Wayne Miller. So help me, thank you. So, so people tend to meet our expectations. If we give people a ceiling, they hit it. If we give people a really higher ceiling, they hit and surpass it. And so there's one wonderful example of this organization based out of St. Louis called Barry Wayne Miller. They're a good old American manufacturing company. They make big machines that make big paper products. And they have a purpose, which is that we go on to create extraordinary human beings who do extraordinary things, which isn't just for the people making the machines, it's for anyone. It can be someone in admin, it can be someone in accounting, anyone. And so they have a standard of why they exist, which is around human potential. And so they grow often through acquisition, and they'll buy underperforming manufacturing facilities, bring their culture to that facility, and then all of a sudden people enjoy working there because they have strong relationships with the people around them. And so there's one story where they bought a new organization, and in this manufacturing facility, there were gates up that if you wanted to take a supply out, there was someone's job who sat there all day and checked out a supply so that no one would steal. In the upstairs, if you wanted to get a new stapler or a notepad, if you're a white collar worker, you just went and got it. No one was taking stock of that. If you needed to make a phone call home that you were running late on the factory floor, you needed to have your own quarter. But upstairs, you had a phone, right? And so what they did is they just took away all those measures, and they said, we trust you. We're taking down the gates. The person whose job was to sign in and sign out, we're giving them a new, better job, and the payphones are now free. And something marvelous happened, which is anyone who would take advantage of it, everyone would say, what are you doing? Don't ruin it for the rest of us. They're finally trusting us, treating us with dignity and as human beings. Like, if you do it, I'm gonna rat you out because I don't want it to be ruined for the rest of us. So that's an example of how you can create a really healthy culture by trusting people more. Because leaders don't say, I'll trust you when you prove to me that you're trustworthy. No, they come in with a foundation that I already trust you. The other thing that comes to mind is a particularly embarrassing moment for me. So David's like, go on.
Add it to my list.
Yeah. So I worked with a fairly small organization. It was about 10 people at the time. And we were looking to hire somebody new. And the CEO, we began interviewing someone. I was going to work closely with this person. And it was very naturally within proper sort of human resources code was revealed that this person was pregnant with twins and like 6 months pregnant with twins. And so I said to our CEO, like, is this the right idea to hire someone who we're going to train for 3 months and then they're going to go on maternity leave, which is kind of a really awful thing to say that I'm not proud of, but I had a trusting relationship with the CEO and I just said it. And my CEO nipped it in the butt and said, do you realize how loyal this person is going to be when we're taking a risk on them when they need it most? They said, we're absolutely hiring this person. They're the right person for the job. And they were with the company for 7 years and was an amazing, loyal, hardworking person. And so that was an example of a leader really, creating an environment where I could say the thing and then nipping it based on our values and beliefs of creating a great environment with great loyalty.
Okay, we've got time for probably one, maybe two questions. Please, go ahead.
So where does profitability fit in all of this? I get people over profitability, but how do you still instill a competitive, hey, we do need to make a profit, we need to create value for our company, and still optimize, hey, we care for each other?
Absolutely. So the question is, profits are still blood within an organization. Like, we need profits. Where does profitability fit into all this? No mission, no margin, no margin, no mission. And so what I would say is that profitability is an output, and we cannot control outputs. All we can control is inputs. And the more senior you get, the further away you typically get from the customer and the activities that happen to create profitability. And so I think we need to work with that order. I mean, an organization must exist to serve an end user, has to. But leaders must exist to serve their people, right? Like, no CEO deals with a customer, barely any, particularly when the organization becomes successful enough. And so I think that we know that it's the inputs and the teams and the environments that we create for our people who then are closer to the end user. So an organization must exist to serve a company exists to serve customers, but leaders exist to serve their people. And when leaders serve their people serve one another. It's a healthy culture, and that always gets out to the customer, the end user, and takes care of the profitability, the results, or the shareholders' interests. So I think absolutely profitability is important. It's vital. It's healthy blood, but it's to realize that it's an output, not an input. And we can't control for it. We can only focus on what is in our control.
Joe, how are we doing on time? One more? Okay, please, go ahead.
So I appreciate the Norway joke because I am Norwegian.
I'm very sorry for the joke.
But I was thinking about different countries and if there's different speak-up cultures.
Oh, for sure. It's a great question. So the question is, are there differences in speak-up cultures across different cultures? And absolutely. Particularly in many Asian cultures, you do not speak up to authority. And so Malcolm Gladwell wrote in his book Outliers that for many Asian airlines, they actually had to train that out because, not speaking up to authority is fine for your father-in-law, not really good in the context of the responsibility of 189 souls. And there were instances where they got the black box recordings of a pilot and a co-pilot, a more junior co-pilot, who knew there was ice on the wing, but they just go, do you think we should maybe, like they knew, but they didn't speak up. And so I think, particularly as the world is becoming more remote, we're beginning to work with far more cultures across the world because we can, which is great. And I think we need to establish what's the culture of this organization. And though it may be uncomfortable, it's for good reason. And we will let you fail, and it is all good. But this is the reason why we have this type of organization. And it will make more competitive organizations, I believe, by having speak-up cultures. That those most senior in the organization know what's actually going on, that their dashboard is reality when it comes to results and culture. But it's a great question that we need to be mindful of the cultures that we're in. Yeah.
Great. You can squeeze in a lightning round question if you like.
I mean, everything from this side. What's going on? We got like one question from over here. Go ahead.
What are ways you've prompted people who still don't speak up, right? Rather than being direct, maybe they're introverted.
Yeah.
Like what are like, more maybe logical reasons that have allowed them to speak up?
So great question. So the question is, for those who are more introverted, may not have the confidence to, but yet have something valuable to bring, how do you encourage a speak up culture where they don't want to speak up or it's not their factory or default setting? I think a few things come to mind here. So there's the golden rule, which we all learn in kindergarten, which is do unto others as you would want done unto yourself, which lacks any empathy. I'm not a fan, right? Platinum rule, which is do unto others the way they would want to be treated themselves. So if you know that you have someone who's introverted and it is not their style to speak up, pull them aside and say, I really value your input. I know you're thinking. Would it be okay if I call on you in meetings? Or what's your preferred way of giving feedback? Do you want to write an email, right? Now it's really hard for me to read long emails, so if you write me that email, are you willing to then sit down and go through it with me the next morning, right? And really knowing that you value that person's input. I mean, it's one of my favorite things to do in a meeting, when we all have that one person who's like sitting and they're like that, it's usually him. And I go, David, you haven't spoken in 15 minutes, what do you got? Because I know he has something. And I know in the next talk that David's gonna give, it's all about human connection and relationship. It's that platinum rule. And knowing, I was coaching a senior executive recently who was new in role, and his EA was working really hard for him. And he said, I'm gonna go buy them some flowers or something. And I said, well, do you know that they'll appreciate flowers? And he goes, no. I'm like, well, do you know someone who knows them well enough to know what they would appreciate as a gift? He went, yeah. I said, ask them. Because you could send flowers and it could be totally miss the mark. They said, no, give them a call and thank them sincerely, right? Now that's platinum rule. So do unto others the way they would wish to be treated, which takes work.
How do you feel about
Anonymous?
anonymous? Anonymous feedback tools?
So the question is, how do I feel about anonymous or giving people anonymous feedback tools? So there's evidence to prove that an independent hotline, for an example, creates a better performing, safer and healthy culture. So when it comes to speak up cultures and psychological safety, a misnomer with it is that there's no issues. No, there's issues, but we feel safe talking about them. Having something like a hotline or an independent body is healthy. Even having anonymous feedback is fine, but I think it should be paired with coaching. And I also think that we should have the types of environments where people are willing to write their name next to their feedback so they can actually work on the relationships. I mean, I know in many military contexts, there's something called a peer review, and that it's supposed to be anonymous. Everyone writes their name on it because they have those types of relationships. So I for an organization that might not be far enough along in the process, start with anonymous. But I think once you do create that healthy culture, to be able to put a name next to it and to have those conversations of conflict and tension healthy. Because if you don't, you have what a colleague of mine calls conflict debt, where it just keeps building up. So I'd rather have anonymous than nothing.
Great questions, everybody. Thank you so much. Stephen, thanks again.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, guys. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.